Every story we tell is a mirror, reflecting a small piece of your own life and experiences. Look closely, and you might just find the answers you've been searching for in the shadows. Click subscribe now to keep exploring the many reflections of the human heart with us.
The moment I put my key into the front door of the house I had bought for my son, something felt wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, and I had flown 17 hours from Dubai without telling anyone I was coming. 8 years since I had stood on American soil, and the whole flight home I had been imagining the look on my son's face when he opened the door and found me standing there. I pictured him laughing, maybe pulling me into one of those bear hugs he used to give me when he was a teenager. I pictured his wife, Colleen, offering me coffee and fussing over my suitcase. I pictured my grandson, Oliver, running down the hallway in his socks. What I did not picture was silence. It was 10 in the morning on a weekday, so I understood the house might be quiet. But this was a different kind of quiet, the kind that presses against the walls. I turned the key slowly, the way you do when you are not sure what you are walking into, and I pushed the door open. The living room was dim. The curtains were drawn across the big bay window I had paid extra for, the one I remembered my son saying he wanted so that Oliver would have good light to read by. There were dishes stacked near the hallway, not in the kitchen, just sitting on the floor near the baseboard, like someone had run out of places to put things. The rug I had given them as a housewarming gift, a thick wool one I had shipped from overseas, was gone. In its place was a bare, hardwood floor with a long scratch running across it that had not been buffed out. And then I heard it, from the kitchen. A sound I recognized from raising my son alone after his mother passed. The sound of someone trying very hard not to cry while they worked. I walked toward it. My son Daniel was on his knees on the kitchen floor with a scrub brush in his hand, cleaning the grout between the tiles. He was wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too big that hung off one shoulder, and when I stepped into the doorway, he looked up at me with the kind of expression I have only seen on a person who has forgotten what it feels like to be surprised by something good. He flinched. My own son flinched when he saw me standing in his kitchen. "Dad," he said. His voice came out rough, like he had not used it much that morning. I looked at him kneeling on that floor. I looked at his hands, red and cracked from the cleaning solution. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes, and the way his collarbone pushed out against the collar of his shirt in a way it never used to. And I thought about the last 8 years of phone calls that had grown shorter and shorter. The video calls where he always had the camera angled, so I could mostly just see his face and a blank wall behind him. The Christmas I had sent plane tickets, and Colleen had written back 3 weeks later to say they had decided to stay home. I crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, and I put my arms around him right there on the floor, and I held on to my son, and I felt him go rigid for a moment, before something inside him broke open and he grabbed the back of my jacket with both fists and held on. I had not planned to come back yet. My contract in Dubai still had 4 months on it. But 3 weeks earlier, I had been sitting in my apartment watching the news after a long shift, and I had picked up my phone to call Daniel, and the call had gone to a number no longer in service message. I had called twice more. Then I had called the landline number I still had written in the back of my address book, the old-fashioned way, and a woman whose voice I did not recognize had answered and told me I had the wrong number. I had emailed. No response for 11 days. Then a single line back from Colleen's account. "Daniel is fine. He's just been busy. We'll call soon." They did not call. I booked the flight that same night. We sat at the kitchen table, and Daniel made coffee, and for a few minutes he did not say anything real. He asked about my flight. He asked about the weather in Dubai. His hands were wrapped around his mug, and he kept his eyes down, and I recognized all of it. The way a person shrinks himself when he has been told often enough that what he thinks and feels takes up too much space. I asked him where Oliver was. He told me Oliver was at school. I asked him where Colleen was. There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "She's at her mother's," he said. "She goes there a few days a week." I asked him why his phone number had changed. He said he had gotten a new plan, said the old one had too many fees. I let it go for the moment. But I was looking at my son who had been a mechanical engineer, who had designed load-bearing systems for commercial buildings, who had coached Oliver's Little League team 2 years running. And I was trying to reconcile that man with the one sitting across from me, who would not make eye contact, and who had been scrubbing grout at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. "Are you working?" I asked. He looked at the table. "Not right now," he said. "I had an injury. I've been dealing with some things." I found out the rest slowly, over 3 days, the way you find out about a leak in a foundation. One crack revealing another, and then another, until you understand the whole structure is compromised. Daniel had been in a car accident 26 months earlier. A serious one. A truck had run a red light and hit the driver's side of his car, and he had spent 6 weeks in the hospital with a fractured pelvis and a traumatic brain injury that had affected his memory and concentration. He had not been able to go back to his engineering job. He had tried twice, and both times his employer had let him go after a few months, citing performance. He had applied for disability benefits and been denied. He had appealed and was waiting. During the accident recovery, Colleen had taken over all the finances. All of them. She had told him it was to reduce his stress while he healed. She'd had him sign documents while he was still on a heavy regimen of pain medication and anti-anxiety drugs in the hospital. He had not understood what he was signing. He told me this the way a man tells you something he has convinced himself is not as serious as it sounds. I asked him what documents. He said he thought it was insurance paperwork. I asked if he still had copies. He said Colleen kept all the paperwork. She kept it organized, he said. It was easier that way. By the time Oliver came home from school that afternoon, I had been sitting with the full weight of what my son had just told me for several hours, and I had made a decision not to say everything I was thinking until I understood the situation completely. Oliver was 9 years old, and he had my son's eyes, and he ran into the kitchen and stopped when he saw me, and then very seriously walked over and shook my hand before I pulled him in for a hug. He smelled like grass and cafeteria pizza, and he asked me if I had brought anything from Dubai, and I told him I had a bag full of things with his name on it in my rental car. That evening, after Oliver went to bed, Daniel told me the rest. The house. The house I had bought. The house that was in Daniel's name. The 3-bedroom colonial in a good school district that I had paid for outright so my son would always have something solid under his feet. Colleen had had him sign it into a joint trust 18 months ago. He had signed it on a Sunday evening after Colleen had told him that a joint trust was a way of protecting Oliver's inheritance, that their financial advisor had recommended it, that it would only take a few minutes. He had been on a muscle relaxer for a back spasm. He had signed where she pointed. I asked him who the financial advisor was. He said it was a man named Garrett, Colleen's cousin. I asked Daniel if he had a copy of the trust documents. He said he didn't know where they were kept. He said Colleen handled all of that. I went to my rental car and sat in the dark for a while. Then I came back inside, and I sat back down at the kitchen table with a legal pad I had bought at the airport, and I wrote down everything Daniel had told me. And then I took out my phone, and I called the one person I knew I could trust to tell me what I was looking at. My brother-in-law Warren had been a family law attorney in the same city for 31 years. It was almost midnight, but he picked up after 2 rings the way he always had when something was serious. I told him what I knew. He was quiet while I talked. When I finished, he said, "Victor, do not let that man sign anything else. Not a grocery list. Not a birthday card. Nothing." He said what I was describing, a person in medical recovery being presented with documents they did not understand, by someone with a financial interest in the outcome without independent legal counsel, had a name. He said there were civil remedies. He said I needed to find those trust documents. The next morning, I waited until Colleen came home. She was not expecting me. She walked in the front door with a dry cleaning bag over one arm and a coffee in her other hand, and when she saw me standing in the living room, her face went through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds before it settled on something pleasant and controlled. "Victor," she said, "what a surprise. When did you get in?" I told her 2 days ago. I watched her process that. The fact that I had been there 2 days and she was only now finding out. She asked why Daniel had not told her I was coming. I said I supposed he didn't think he needed to give advance notice about his father visiting his own home. She smiled. It did not reach her eyes. She said of course not, she was just surprised. She was so happy I was here. I told her I'd love to see the trust documents when she had a moment. The smile did not move, but something behind it shifted. She said she wasn't sure what I meant. I told her the joint trust she had had Daniel sign 18 months ago, She said it was just estate planning, very routine, everyone did it. I told her I'd still like to see them. She said she would have to find them, she'd have to look. She wasn't sure where they were filed. I told her that was fine. I'd wait. She went upstairs. I sat on the couch in my son's living room, and I thought about 8 years of phone calls, and the way his voice had changed over time, and the Christmas plane tickets he had never used, and the image of him flinching when he saw me standing in his kitchen door. And I thought about all the things I had told myself to explain why I stayed in Dubai instead of coming home sooner. The contract obligations, the retirement savings I was building for him and Oliver, the fact that he had always said everything was fine, that Colleen was great, that they were happy. I had believed what I wanted to believe because it was easier than getting on a plane. That is the truth, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Warren drove over that evening. He sat at the kitchen table with Daniel and with the documents Colleen had eventually produced from a filing box in the upstairs closet, and he read through all 14 pages while nobody spoke. Oliver was at a neighbor's house. Colleen had taken her phone into the backyard. When Warren looked up from the last page, he said, "Daniel, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them as honestly as you can." He asked Daniel what he had understood the documents to mean when he signed them. Daniel said estate planning, protecting Oliver's inheritance, like Colleen had explained. Warren asked if Daniel had read them before signing. Daniel said he had looked at them, but his reading comprehension had been affected by the brain injury, and he had had trouble following the legal language. Warren asked if he had been offered the option of consulting a separate attorney before signing. Daniel said no. Warren asked what medications he had been taking at the time of signing. Daniel listed them. Warren wrote them down. Then Warren told us what the documents actually said. The trust had been structured so that Colleen held sole trustee authority over all assets, including the house. In the event of Daniel's incapacitation or death, full control transferred to Colleen, without condition. In the event of divorce, Colleen retained the right to remain in the property until Oliver turned 18, with no mechanism for Daniel to reclaim sole ownership. The financial advisor, Colleen's cousin Garrett, had drafted the documents and was named as successor trustee. Daniel sat very still while Warren explained this. Then he said, very quietly, "I didn't know that's what it said." Warren said he believed him. He said the question was whether a court would believe him, and that the answer depended on the documentation, the medical records showing Daniel's cognitive state at the time of signing, the prescription records, any communications where Colleen had described the purpose of the documents to Daniel. I asked Daniel if he still had his phone from 18 months ago. He said it had been replaced. Colleen had said it was time for an upgrade. I asked if he had kept any old emails. He thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "She said I should clean out my email. She set up a new account for me, but I think the old one might still exist." It took us 2 hours that night to find the login credentials and access the old account. There were 43 emails between Daniel and Colleen from the 6 weeks before and after the document signing. In those emails, Colleen had described the trust as simple paperwork to protect Oliver's college fund. She had told him their attorney had reviewed it. She had told him signing that weekend was important because there were tax deadlines. None of those things were true. Warren photographed every email from his phone. The next morning, he filed a petition to void the trust on the basis of undue influence and lack of informed consent. Colleen did not respond well to being served. There were 2 days of conversations in that house that I will not detail here except to say that I understood by the end of them exactly how 8 years of small pressures and quiet erosions had turned my son from the man I knew into the man I had found scrubbing grout on his kitchen floor. She had not done it all at once. She had done it the way water shapes stone, slowly, consistently, invisibly, until the damage was already done. I moved into the guest room. I was not leaving. There was a hearing 6 weeks later. Daniel's medical records supported everything Warren had argued. His neuropsychologist testified that at the time of the document signing, Daniel's executive function and reading comprehension had been significantly impaired, and that he had been on a combination of medications that would have substantially reduced his ability to understand complex legal language or evaluate risk. The emails provided documentary evidence of how the documents had been characterized to him. Garrett had no professional certification as a financial advisor. He had a real estate license. The judge voided the trust entirely. The house went back to Daniel as sole owner. There was a moment after the judge finished speaking when I looked over at my son sitting at that table in his good suit, the one I had helped him pick out the day before the hearing, and I watched him put his face in his hands for a few seconds. Not from sadness, just from the kind of relief that has nowhere else to go. Oliver did not fully understand what had happened in court that day, but he understood that the adults around him were less frightened than they had been for a while. And that evening he sat on the living room floor doing his homework, while Daniel and I watched a baseball game, and at some point he looked up and asked if I was going to stay for Thanksgiving. I told him I was going to stay for a lot more than Thanksgiving. I ended my contract in Dubai early. My employer was understanding. I had given them 8 years and I was not asking for anything, just releasing the final 4 months. I lost some money on it. I did not care. I stayed in the guest room for 3 months while Daniel got back on his feet. And I mean that in every sense, literally some days, when the pain from the accident was bad and he needed someone to drive Oliver to school, and figuratively in every other way, we found him a neuropsychologist who specialized in traumatic brain injury recovery. We refiled his disability application with proper documentation this time and a letter from his neurologist. We found him an engineering firm that had a part-time consulting role for people returning from medical leave, a kind of bridge back to full-time work. He is not all the way back yet. He may never be exactly who he was before the accident, but he is getting up in the morning with something in his eyes that had not been there when I arrived. Oliver is doing well. He has taken to calling me on school nights, not for any particular reason, just to talk. Last week he told me about a science project he was working on involving the water cycle, and wanted to know if I had ever seen the Persian Gulf up close. I told him I had seen it almost every morning for 8 years. He asked what it looked like. I told him it looked like someone had poured a sheet of hammered copper over the horizon. He said that was a weird way to describe water. I told him he was probably right. There is something I want to say to anyone listening who has a child or a sibling or a parent that you've been meaning to check on. Someone you have been telling yourself is probably fine because it is easier to believe that than to book the flight and find out. I am not saying every situation is what mine was. Most of the time things probably are fine. But there came a point in those 8 years where I stopped asking real questions and started accepting whatever answer I was given. And I did that because asking real questions might mean I would have to do something. And doing something would have disrupted the life I had built for myself 6,000 miles away. I built that life for Daniel. That is what I told myself. The retirement savings, the stability, all of it for him. And some of that was true, but some of it was for me, and I think I owe it to my son and to myself to say that clearly. He needed me there, not the money I was sending, not the phone calls that had gotten shorter every year, me in the house at the kitchen table asking the questions that could not be answered with, "Everything's fine." I lost 8 years of watching Oliver grow up. I lost 8 years of being present for whatever my son was going through. I got back in time to help, and I am grateful for that, more than I have words for. But I am not going to wrap this story in a bow and tell you the ending makes the years I was absent make sense, because it doesn't. What I can tell you is what I know now, standing in my son's kitchen on a Wednesday morning, watching him help Oliver pack his lunch before school, both of them arguing over whether a cheese stick counts as a protein, Oliver insisting that it does, and Daniel saying it depends on your definition. What I know is that the best thing I ever did was get on that plane, and the second best thing was not getting back on one. If you are listening to this story and there is someone in your life you have been meaning to call, I want you to put this video on pause right now and make that call, not after the video. Now, whatever is waiting on the other end of that phone, good news, bad news, a voice that sounds different than you remember, whatever it is better than the alternative. The alternative is 8 years. Trust me.